Welcome to this webinar on Treasury under attack, building resilience against cyber threats and payment fraud. I am Marielle Barkley, the editor of this award-winning Global Treasury Leaders Program, which is organized by the Economist Impact and supported by Deutsche Bank. The program has two objectives. On one hand, to share thought leadership, and secondly, to connect treasurers around the world. And we do this through a series of activities every year, which include summits in different regions, webinars like this one you are joining today, articles, and an online community where we host these contents. The community is open to corporates only, and this allows treasurers from all over the world to connect and exchange ideas on any topic of their interest. It is totally free, and I am now going to share a link via the chat facility so that you can join if you would like to. Just remember to choose the Global Treasury Leaders Network when asked what groups you would like to join. You can join as many as you like, but it's important to remember that it's the Global Treasury Leaders Network for this one in particular. But now going back to today's webinar, the idea is to make this session as interactive as possible. So please ask as many questions as you would like using the questions tab, not the chat, and please send them to us as soon as you think of them. Otherwise you will forget. We will bring them up when appropriate. Without further ado, please let me introduce today's webinar's chair, Onkar Lidar, who is Managing Director and Assistant Treasurer at Accenture. Onkar, over to you.
Hi, thank you very much, Mariel. Today we've got a great discussion and fantastic panel. We're going to be talking about building the resilience against cyber threats and payment fraud. As many of you are practitioners in the space of corporate treasury, will witness AI and modern technology has helped us a great deal and promises to help us significantly in our day-to-day jobs. But it also has a potential threat. Cyber threats that can cause disruption in our processes, disruption in our payments, and potential threats to our data, from anything from AI-generated deepfakes, manipulated audio or video content to impersonate executives, all things that we've seen in the market and experienced in certain cases. So we've got a great panel here to talk about what they in their space are doing to build that resilience, to prove themselves stronger than the bad actors. And we're going to be talking to each of them and maybe have a great discussion about what's happening in their space, what are they doing, and what are they seeing that is likely to be a problem moving forward, and how we can better prepare ourselves in that situation. So without further ado, let me ask Lena from Equinor to introduce herself. And maybe as you introduce yourself, Lena, could you just give us a very brief overview of what you're doing and what you're seeing in the space of cyber threats and payment fraud?
Yeah, thank you, Onkar, for the introduction. Hello, everyone. My name is Lena Myklebust, and I'm heading up cash management infrastructure in Equinor. Equinor is a global energy company with presence in more than 30 countries and 22,000 employees worldwide. In Equinor, we provide energy in the form of oil and gas, onshore and offshore wind, solar power, and we also do CO2 storage. So we operate worldwide, providing energy to several countries. And in my team in cash management infrastructure, we are responsible for the payment factory for our company. We are a very centralized treasury organization, so we are responsible for setting up safe and secure compliant payment infrastructure for all our entities worldwide. Also with that, we are responsible for selecting cash management banks that we would like to work with and operate with in the different countries. And in this topic today, we work a lot on the cyber threat and activities around that. We have continuously testing of our business continuity planning together with both the CFO Treasury organization, but also key stakeholders in in the company. So working closely with business areas, also prioritizing what are the most critical deliveries, operations, and also how we can build and strengthen the resilience around maintaining operations during a cyber attack or any system downtime. So that's a big focus area in the company.
Thank you very much, Lena. And Kemi, over to you.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kemi Bolarin. I'm the head of Treasury for GXO Logistics in Europe. We are a global logistics and warehouse solutions company, and we serve some of the world's largest businesses. For us, cyber threats and payment fraud are very real and constantly evolving, which makes, payment security a business critical priority. It's not just a back office task. Within my team, so I head up Treasury, I'm based in Europe. We are not as centralized as Lena has described there. Within Europe, we're spread across 13 countries, across multiple divisions. Our in-country finance people will still have to process their financial flows. So that level of fragmentation is actually a challenge for us. So while I'm responsible for banking relationships across Europe, I still have to deal with or have an overview around how our financial flows being processed in country. I mean, my role is about building resilience through people, processes, and technology. And I'm honestly looking forward to sharing my experience today and learning from my fellow panelists, on how they are viewing this ever-present danger that we talk about that is ever evolving, and what sort of cutting-edge solutions can we actually take back in how we manage our businesses within GXO.
Gemma, from a banking perspective, just introduce yourself and a few seconds just on what you're seeing.
Exactly. Thank you very much. So my name is Jose Bue, or Chema Bue. Chema is my short name. Many people probably know me more than Chema than Jose. I'm part of the cash management product team. I've been in different positions in product roles for the last 20 years. And my current role basically is to lead a global team that basically focus on developing client account solutions or account servicing solutions. And therefore, my focus is ranging for things like real-time reporting for clients. But also in the last years, we've been focusing a lot on something which I think it's very, very important and becoming obviously a key topic for all corporate clients, which is how to basically mitigate and reduce payment fraud. So my team has been working on different solutions. We'll talk about this today, how our solutions on, for example, pre-validation space can help corporate clients to reduce that growing risk on payments, especially obviously now we are in a world of instant, everything happens instantly, which is great. But obviously that also creates additional challenges that we have to discuss, along with the regulatory environment, which is also evolving, and that's something that we have to keep an eye as well. So my idea today is to talk about these challenges, opportunities, and obviously to share as much as possible my experience in this area with everyone here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Onkar.
Thank you. So just to move to Jason. Jason, introduce yourself by all means to the audience, but I'm going to kick off with you with the question. We talk about cyber security. Can you, being who you are as a security specialist, define to us what the problem is?
Sure. It's a pleasure to meet everybody, and thank you for having me. My name is Jason Smolenoff. I'm a senior advisor over at Kroll, and Kroll is a global risk management company. And so we assist folks like Kima, like Kimmy, like Lena, and their companies with helping them to develop programs to understand what their risk appetite is, how to manage that risk appetite, and how to develop programs to really help them solve problems and reduce their risk to a variety of different types of, in this case, could be financial fraud, but it could be other types of fraud or physical cybersecurity or other types of security issues that are out there. That question, Onkar, is a huge question. Like, what is the risk that's going on out there? I think when you start to look at the cybersecurity risk profile. There's a lot of different names out there, and I think they're kind of designed to really scare people. There's ransomware, there's vishing, there's phishing, there's smishing, there's you name it, there's a different type of word out there. And I think technology nerds like me love to come up with different names because it makes them feel good, and it kind of like plants a flag for them personally or their companies. But it's really not that um, complicated, right? There's only like a handful of types of issues that are out there. There's cybersecurity issues that affect people physically, like cyberbullying. There's issues that really what we'll focus on here today is around financial fraud. Then there's issues that come up with espionage and other types of intelligence gathering. And then there's other issues or cyber issues that come up around people conducting certain types of activities to promote some type of social agenda. And we call those sometimes hacktivists or things like that. So I just want folks to start off on a basic level. You might hear a lot of different terms out there, but try not to get confused. There's only really four major categories that you need to deal with when you're looking at it from a risk perspective. And then you can kind of drill down from there. And in this case, we can drill down into financial fraud that's going on out there. And what I'm seeing these days in the most part is social engineering that is being used, whether it's with AI or business email compromises, and we can kind of get into that as we move along here, that are used to sort of trick people into getting Kimmy and Lena's team to send you money or send attackers money, without actually intruding or breaking into the computer networks. It's all being done with social engineering and different types of fraud. So when we stop and think about it in the financial case, I see only really two types of ways that attackers tend to get in. They either social engineer someone on a financial treasury team to have them make a payment in a legitimate way, right? I mean, they're tricking people, or they find a vulnerability in a network, and they exploit that vulnerability to make a payment. So I just want to start this off as saying you might hear a lot of different complicated and interesting and I would call kind of technology sexy terms, but we don't need to get bogged down in that. Like I would just keep it very simple. It's social engineering fraud or some type of vulnerability in the computer network that allows an attacker to get in to steal money in some way, shape, or form.
Okay, thank you, Jason. And that's a really good segue, Kenny, for us to talk as practitioners. In GXO, what have you done? You talked about people, process, and technology, but from a process and people perspective, what is it that you guys have done to help address these threats that Jason's just articulated?
Brilliant. Jason, thank you for that. I'm glad that I'm following you because I do like the way that you've reframed this as people systems. In a way, I think it just brings the sort of focus that we need and get away from sort of the fancy names that these threats, have been given. I mean, from my perspective, and I'll come to your question on kind of minute, but from my perspective as a treasurer, I would like to hold on that point around people. One of the biggest lessons is that people are our strongest defense and also our biggest vulnerability. So, we talk about cyber threats, we talk about payment fraud. It's constantly evolving. It's got really good fancy names about it. But no matter how strong our systems are, it only takes one click on phishing email and that's it. Everything unravel. So what I've seen in Treasury is that as these threats, are becoming more sophisticated year on year, the traditional side of things still remain. That business email compromise, that fake supplier invoices, the CEO impersonation, the urgency that comes with these payments. And I know they're the modern ones, like ransomware, deepfakes. I mean, lots of that stuff in the news recently is about that. Fraudsters creating urgency, tricking employees into acting before we even verify. So what have we done? I mean, based on the fact that at GXO, we serve a whole variety of companies that actually rely on us. Data privacy, information security is critical to our business priority. End of is a key ESG goal for us. So it is executive-led, it's executive-sponsored. It's all about employee readiness, which is a core part of our resilience strategy. So, I mean, we can talk about using industry-leading technologies, best practice processes. It boils down to ensuring that we are adequately trained. We're adequately reminded that this is a clear present danger and it is evolving. So at GXO, we have what we call the GXO Universities, an online training platform. We do disseminate training programs via that platform. I'm moving away from Treasury. It is not focused on Treasury. We're talking about across the entire organization. So we roll out this mandatory, and I'm emphasizing mandatory, cybersecurity awareness and training programs. It's to help us, understand what is this evolving threat, move away from all those really technical labels that can scare us away. And it's about taking ownership around our own individual responsibility of ensuring that we're keeping our networks and our data secure. We do receive regular phishing simulations. I mean, there's been a couple of near misses there, where you get an email from, I don't know, British Airways X.Y sort of thing, and you think, oh yeah, that must be a unique email. You click on it and you say, well, that's a simulation. You've done something wrong there. But why? I mean, as flippant as I've made it sound, it's just that sort of constant reminder that, this can happen. Business email compromise is still one of our biggest threats. And alongside that, we have multiple layers of technical controls that's defending the whole estate of our devices across network, applications, automation, cloud environments, constantly testing how our passwords are, how simple are they? What's the level of your password from very simple travel pod 123 to, I don't know, one that has exclamations, inverted commas, underscores, and everything else. Across that strategy as well are tabletop exercises whereby, audits validating our controls, our readiness to act in case of attacks. So there's a whole suite of, what is being packaged into our sort of GXO resilience strategy around cybersecurity, payment fraud. But if I narrow it down to Treasury then augments our sort of overriding group strategy by partnering with banks on, because they are the first line of defense. They see the entire ecosystem of a financial flow. So we've partnered with one of our banking partners to curate what we call our payment fraud awareness program. Again, this is just so that we streamline the focus, that, payment is still an issue here. What can we do? How can we ensure that our employees are trained to spot the red flags, to know when they're faced with a suspicious request, when there's an urgency, taking a step back and making sure that they put together, very good, robust strategy of check and balances. So it's about creating that sort of company-wide awareness, training programs that are not just tick box exercises. These training programs are tracked, they're KPI'd, they're tied to performance reviews, but the core to this is ensuring that, we have that level of employee readiness, there's the employee resilience, then that defense is, in a way, well trained, to be aware of a potential attack.
Perfect. All right, we'll come back to the KPI because I think that's fascinating. And Lena, just as a comparison, when we were preparing for this call, you mentioned to me kind of business continuity planning. And something you said resonated. How do we deal with a blank screen scenario? So in comparison to what Kemi said, what are you guys in Equinor doing?
Yeah, so I think we can start with the standard. So in Equinor, we have a global payment policy. So everyone dealing with payments in the company needs to adhere to that policy. It comes to requirements on how to perform payments. We have controls in place, also checking that we have encryptions, no amendments are made to the payment files and so on before it's sent to the banks. And I think most important is how to protect also the individuals and the company is that we have segregation of duties, segregation of roles. So no individual in the company should have the ability to both input and approve its own payment. So these controls are basics in the company that we adhere to all the time. And then it comes to training and business continuity planning. And so I think last year in 2024, we took a bit of a step back to reflect on the cybersecurity threat and the landscape, and how we can shift the focus more from the IT tools to the business impact of the company if we are in a black screen scenario, for example. So what are the most important business critical tasks that we need to continue to deliver on? And one of the assessments in the CFO organization as such is that being able to perform payments is one of the most critical tasks, and also remaining the financial resilience in the company. So what we did then in 2024, and which we will also build on further on, is that we did a 3-day exercise on cybersecurity. We had more than 600 employees involved in this exercise, 47 teams, 8 locations, and I think 5 countries were involved. So it was broader than just the CFO organization, and it involves also the business areas and all the F&C personnel working with payments as such. And we also did actually a 3-week time jump during those 3 weeks. So in the beginning, it's all about, okay, how we can maintain or come back to recover IT systems, having the networks available to remain and resume our operations. But then how does it look like 3 weeks down the road? Are we still in the same situation? How are the employees doing? So one of the experience, for example, was that in this situation, many employees are very busy. It felt like a really real incident. We were very involved and working many and long hours, but there was actually a lot of people not doing anything also in this situation, because you have core teams and core people who need to perform and deliver on payments and so on. But there's actually a lot of people who cannot do anything in this situation when you don't have access to systems, no network, no email, no Office 365 tools. So also the employee fatigue was something that came up as a learning in this situation. But the exercise as such was a black screen scenario where all our network was down, no Office 365 tools, no ERP, nothing. So you come to work, it's just a black screen. And we were faced with the ransomware demand and also data leakage threats. So that was the scenario, and also how can we then come together as a team, as a company. We gathered the CFO business continuity team, which I'm part of, representing Treasury in that team, and then just talking to the different clusters on how we come together, how do we prioritize tasks, who is doing what, and actually then trying to resume at least some payment operations. And of course, we have plans then to how to do that when we don't have our ERP or TMS system. We of course go to our banks, and our backup is using the bank's electronic banking systems, and we have very clear procedures on how to do that. But then again, it boils down to capacity to perform these payments and making sure that we do the correct controls, who have requested a payment, who have signed it. We do callbacks, we check the bank account numbers, are they validated, is it going to the correct owner of that bank account, and so on. And also that this is scenarios that we also train with our banks, core banks on these exercises and who does what, and just to prepare the organization. So yeah, it was a really interesting exercise that we did, and we are building on it going forward. We actually had an exercise yesterday as well in the CFO BC team. It was a tabletop exercise also involving the business areas on how they will prioritize their payments. So let's say we have a capacity of 200 payments a day, that's the max. how do the business area prioritize, and how do we prioritize across the company from corporate? What are the most important payments? Because everyone thinks their own payment is important, of course. But then we follow a very strict prioritization of which payments should be done from corporate side. Yeah.
So what I'm hearing is from both Kemi and yourself, Lena, there's a huge push on the process and training our folk, and it's a people-driven aspect, right? Kemi, you said it right. People are our biggest asset, also the biggest vulnerability when it comes to this. So you both mentioned the bank. So there's an interplay between people, technology, which we have to come to, and also our banking partners as well. So Chema, coming to you, what are you seeing that's happening with your clients? And in particular, when it comes to payments, as both panelists have mentioned, payments being one of the critical path issues, how are banks and what is the bank landscape now changing to help clients like ourselves manage the risk around payments?
Absolutely. I think that most of what I hear actually is something that I deal with on a daily basis. There's also a question in the chat that I will go, and I think it's a very good question from Carsten about what is coming in the market, what is verification of pay is coming. So I will come into this in a second. But from a bank perspective, what we are seeing, as I mentioned before, and I'm part of the accounts payments team. So my focus is primarily to look at how we reduce this potential fraud on the payments area. So I'm not I'm a super expert on cybersecurity. I'm more basically coming from this payments angle. So what we see basically is, particularly for the last years, is an increasing risk on payment business. And that comes with different factors. So Jason was talking about this social engineering, all the different possibilities to, try to make fake accounts and redirect invoices into the wrong accounts. Kemi was talking also about the sense of urgency. And obviously, as I mentioned in introduction, with all these new instant payments being roll out globally, that sense of urgency is obviously increasing, and obviously the risk of making the wrong payment and sending money to the wrong beneficiary is obviously increasing. Here, obviously, we can see different potential solutions. So on the one side, regulators are obviously very much aware of what's happening in the market. They are seeing that increased risk on the payment business, and they are trying to react by basically, providing solutions or regulations that basically try to mitigate this risk. I'm just going to mention a few of them because I think it's relevant for people in this webinar as well to be aware. Some of you, potentially those ones based in the UK or dealing with UK companies, are probably aware that in 2020, so it's already like 5 years ago, there was an initiative called COP, or Confirmation of Pay, which was launched in the UK, which basically intending to introduce a new possibility to verify the beneficiary of a particular payment in response to the launch of the so-called faster payments, which is the instant payment scheme in the UK. So that was launched 5 years ago. More than 300 participants in the network, almost 3 billion of checks done in the last 5 years, and significant reduction of the fraud in the UK based on that initiative. So I think that I read a statistic that said that I think last year the fraud on the APP business was more than 20%, which is I think is quite relevant. That's the UK. But if we look across the globe, and I will come to Europe in a second, we see that also in APAC, there is many other initiatives being launched with their call account validations, proxy solutions that basically try to address the same challenge. So we can see solutions being rolled out in Singapore, in Indonesia, in India, in Australia recently as well, and all of them going to the same direction. And obviously in the EU, where probably we had a more fragmented environment, where only certain countries had some solutions in place, some sort of domestic solutions in place. For example, the Netherlands have been operating in this IBAN name scheme for some years. Some other countries were also launching kind of similar initiatives in France, in Italy, in Spain, but all of them were fragmented. So it was only until last year when the so-called instant payment regulation was introduced. And as part of that, regulators realized we have to also go into the direction of trying to prevent that fraud that is coming with instant payments. And they include something which is called the verification of pay, which is the question from Carsten in the chat. So for those of you that are not familiar with verification of pay basically is giving the payer the ability to validate the beneficiary IBAN and beneficiary name ahead of the payment. So you have additional information before you make the payment. And in case that obviously someone is trying to redirect your IBAN into a wrong account, you could be warned by, in this case, your bank or your PSP, that that payment may go into the wrong account if you proceed. Still, you can go ahead with the payment. So VOP is not about blocking a payment. It's just to give you enough information to decide if you want to continue with that payment. So that's something that is going to be introduced in October this year, so less than a month. So I guess that most of the probably participants in the webinar that are in corporate or banks, they're all very busy at the moment with rolling out this. I think that definitely is going to be a very good step forward in terms of mitigating those risks, at least in the SEPA area, starting with the Euro countries in October. However, obviously, that's just one step further. It's not obviously the solution. And I think the question in the chat, which I think is very relevant, is, okay, but we're talking about domestic solutions in the UK or in certain countries in APAC or now in Europe, but is there a plan to basically extend that globally? And the answer, unfortunately, is not yet, but we are seeing very good steps towards this. So I can also speak briefly if there's an interest on this. I can obviously go more deeper, but there is a new recommendation from the FATF task force, basically, which is called the recommendation 16, also called travel rule, that tries to basically go in parallel with the rollout of the ISO 20022 messages, which provide more structured information to make sure that beneficiary banks get all the real information. And along with that recommendation, they're basically introducing the idea of making the controls of beneficiary banks more strict when creating payments. And this could be in different ways. It could be just by forcing beneficiary banks to perform a name number check at transaction level, which might be, for example, difficult in Europe because all SEPA payments, as you know, they are working basically on the IBAN. So the credit is done on the IBAN, it's not done on the name. It could be that also there are solutions to basically go more holistically about looking at patterns, for example, to detect anomalies. And the third point that they're introducing, which is the one that I think goes in the same direction of COP or VOP, is to introduce on the payer side these so-called pre-validation solutions. Okay, so this is an area that I think it's evolving very quickly. Unfortunately, there is no global solution. I will probably talk later if you are interested on what kind of solutions we see outside, how can we overcome this lack of global framework, but that definitely is a gap today. So that such global framework doesn't exist, which means there is no global solution that can address this at global level. However, all these different domestic solutions and regional solutions will definitely help in that regard.
That's great. So Jason, with that information, we've heard about self-help training, GXO University, business continuity from Lena in Equinor, and Gemma's really nicely put together an image around this VOP and what the banks are doing. Do we, the corporates, now have the upper hand against cybersecurity, or is there something we're missing? What more needs to be done?
Well, I think corporates are really taking things into their own hands, right? Because exactly what Kima said, there is no global solution. There's no banks that are going to come and save you in every aspect of cybersecurity. Like they're definitely assisting. There's definitely validation, and I think validation and verification of individuals and payments and systems is a very important component of it. But when, again, I like to take a step back and start from like the very basics. And I think when corporates are looking at their own programs, the way I measure a good information security program or the maturity of an information security program is how rapidly you can detect and how effectively you can respond to any kind of incident. Okay. And if you start from that basic 100,000-foot view, then you can always start to drill down and figure out what goes on next. And I think what I see is in many cases, many corporates are overly reliant on technology solutions to help mitigate their risk. And I think that tends to be sort of subjugated to IT folks or very technical people. And very technical people love very technical solutions. And when you start with technology, technology then starts to drive your operations and then starts to drive your governance. And I think that's the exact opposite, because I think what Kimmy and Lena's companies are doing, they're doing it the right way, because they're really starting with governance structures that then drive operations and then drive technology. And I think that's the way that you maximize your risk mitigation going forward. And I think that helps to build a much better program. And I think Lena and Kimmy are both, their companies are doing this the right way, because they're training their people. You will only perform as well as you train. And I have seen many companies have a really beautifully crafted legal document that was made by legal for an incident response plan, but nobody understands what's in it. No one understands what to do or how to implement it. And so I think when you start to train with those documents, you start to see that those documents, I think, need to really reflect the operations within the company. So I can talk to you all day about technology solutions, but I think technology solutions alone and left to technologists will only lead to bigger problems down the road. I'm not saying you don't do it, but those technology solutions have to be commensurate with what the risk appetite is for the company and the governance around the company. And then you can go from there. So
Okay, sticking with you, Jason, and I love the way you've kind of really clarified those three parts. So we've got the governance, the people part, we've got the banks, and we've got the technology. But sticking with technology, we all know about the wonderful opportunities that AI is going to give us, but it's also going to give the bad actors opportunities. So where, in your view, does AI form a part of the solution for the corporate side?
Sure. So AI, it's super sexy. It sounds great. It's this big, term that's out there. All I see in a very simple way, because I'm a simple guy, I like to keep things very simple. I like all AI is doing is taking existing frauds and fraud processes and accelerating them and making them feel and look more real. So like Kimmy was talking about business email compromise and social engineering. Lena was talking about a ransomware event. All AI is doing is helping to facilitate the speed and the legitimacy that goes behind those types of frauds. AI is also being used on the security side to help to identify and validate, right? And I think Kima talked about this with the validation. Um, More than ever, you're seeing cybersecurity companies leveraging AI to assist with that validation, right? There's a security principle that's been around forever, trust but verify, okay? And that's really what we're talking about here. On the bad actor side, they're using it to create more realistic social engineering frauds. You're hearing about deepfakes and voice, manipulation, things like that. But on the other side, there's validation and verification that is being done to help accelerate and validate through identity and access management protocols in a much more effective way. And I think you're only going to see that go even further because now biometrics are kind of compromised. So you'll see other types of validations going into this. And I think, Kim is probably, I'm sure Deutsche Bank is definitely on top of this, and Kimmy and Lena's groups will be the beneficiaries of that type of validation.
Okay. Thank you, Jason. Just a quick moment to the delegates on this call. If you have any more questions, please just pop them through the Q&A, and we can try to address those. Thank you, Jason. So, Kemi, I want to go back to one thing that you did, you mentioned, and that's KPIs, which I find quite fascinating. I'm sure a lot of the delegates too. In the GXO University and the training that you've given, how much can you quantify the success that you've had from this training that you've given people? And does the KPI element help bolster your people's focus?
Yeah, that's a good one. So, I mean, for us, the KPIs that are easily measurable now are the KPIs of, who's completed the training, what sort of gaps has been identified. In our prep for this call as well, I think one thing I identified as a takeaway is actually the opportunity to extend the KPI to actively track what I would call treasury type attempts. How many times did we receive an invoice payment that was, that's of course a fraudulent invoice payment? How many times did you receive a direction to a wrong bank account, whereby through employee engagement, through employee awareness workshops, these frauds or attempts is being mitigated? That there's an opportunity for us to track it. So we need to take that in back. The issue here is the fact that, when people are trained and people are aware, then you get this sort of attempts, then it becomes, oh gosh, did you see that? Then we laugh it away. It becomes BAU because we're patting ourselves in the back around our sort of, the positiveness, the positive reinforcement of our strategies without actually tracking it is what is going to give us that continuous sort of positive reinforcement. So no KPI yet around tracking those attempts and then linking it to the fact that increased employee awareness is the reason why, we've been able to change behavior. Employees are better at spotting the red flags. They're actually escalating concerns. They're slowing down when something feels wrong. I think that's the real measure of readiness. And there's an opportunity, for us to be able to track that better, just so that we can see that it's not a perception in our head that we're doing something well, but actually the figures speak well for itself.
So as organizations, as global brands, global presence, multinational companies, our ecosystem is wide and deep, right? We have partners, we have, whether they're partners in our ecosystem, in our build, in our delivery, in our, whatever it may be that we do. You guys, Lena, yourself, and Kemi, you guys have been talking about what you do in your team and how you train. How can you extend your training to your partners as well in your businesses? Maybe Lena, questions for you.
Okay, sure. So maybe I can just mention that I'm also part of what we call the fraud prevention network that we have established in Equinor. So that team consists of business areas, the CFO organization, our AP, AR, vendor master data teams, so everyone involved in payments. And in that forum, we also discuss the latest threats, also maybe potential fraud attempts that has happened, but also the third-party risk, which is very important because in the supply chain that we really depend on, if they are under attack or any downtime or whatever, that will hurt our operations as well, and also the full supply chain. So it will have a ripple effect. So we do not in the CFO organization, but in the procurement and the key people responsible for the contracts, the communication externally. They do talk about this and also maybe advice, but also at least a topic that we can share competence on, share experience, and how we can help each other. I think that's the most important learning that we can do in this community to protect the companies. And I think that's also a learning we have done internally. We can prepare so much with IT systems and so on, but I think one of the key learnings I have at least is that the collaboration that we have established now in the wider organization, how we together can come as a company to build that resilience, because we are so interdependent in delivering the operations in the company. We cannot work in islands and isolated. So that's very important.
Absolutely. So thank you. And so whilst we are players, we have a context of suppliers, vendors, etc., that we need to be cognizant of. There's a really good question here from Michael. Kemi, I'm going to ask you to address it if you can. what is the best approach or format to report cybersecurity at board level? Have you ever come across that? Is that something you guys in GXO do? Do you provide information to board?
We do. We do. I mean, it is part of our process to log even attempts as well, because not just if there's an activity somewhere, but there is a way to, we do track events that's happened across it. Touchwood, it's not been a frequent occurrence, but is a matter for the board to be aware of, because ultimately that would feed into our strategy. We're talking about vulnerability in the system. We're talking about vulnerability in our processes. What exactly is it? Where did that occur from? So yes, there is that level. It's making sure that we are aware of our transactions, we are aware of attempts, we are aware of events where actually attempts, were successful, if at all, and then documenting those through our internal audit processes, again, just so that we are able to put in place a better process to mitigate a future reoccurrence. But definitely it's a matter that goes all the way to the executive function, because as I said earlier, it's a key ESG goal for us. We serve several large companies, small companies across the world. We need to be seen as being watertight. So it's beyond Treasury. It actually extends across the entire organization. So yes, there's a reporting mechanism for that.
Excellent. And Chema, there's a question here for Juan, which I think maybe is a good one for you to address. Assuming the damage is already done and transactions have been performed, is there any development on the area to call back our stolen funds?
That's a good question. And obviously there is ways to basically recall funds, and obviously there is ways for particularly banks to basically communicate and trying to recover the funds. However, all these processes are super complex. All these processes obviously imply a lot of time and usually a lot of cost to basically even legal litigations. So that's why our view is we have to prevent this to happen. So we have to basically go into these preemptive measures to avoid that this money goes into the wrong account. Because once the money is in the wrong account, as I mentioned before, it's very difficult to get the money back in many cases. And even if you are able to get the money back, it's going to be costly and it's going to be obviously taking time. So that's why my view, and as I mentioned before, is basically we have to look at what is available in the market to basically avoid that these situations are happening. So I mentioned some of these regulatory developments. There's also another question from Juan on this about VOP, which I can answer very quickly. So he's asking about when is the incident in Europe. As I mentioned, it's October 9th. So it's just less than a month from now for Euro countries. For the non-Euro countries, that is July 2027. So there's a bit more time, but for the Euro countries is October 9th. How often would the payment is to be verified? As a regulation, that basically forces all payments to be checked, right? So it's not about pre-validation, which what I can talk about in a second, in which you can decide what is the frequency when you want to basically validate your beneficiary accounts. VOP, as part of the regulation, basically enforce all payments to go through the validation. There is a distinction, which I'm not going to go into details, but for single payments, all payments have to go through this verification of pay from October 9th. For bulk payments, that is when you are basically executing files, you have the option to opt in out. So you as a corporate client may say, okay, I have already enough ways to validate my accounts. I'm using a pre-validation solution, or I have other ways to do this, and I don't want my bank to do this verification, so you can opt out. That's a possibility that you can use as a corporate client, okay? But that impacts all channels, including Swift. So you're talking about SwiftNet. Yes, it's impacted. So that obviously will impact. So the focus for us as a global bank is obviously we have to be compliant with these solutions. And it's a big challenge for everyone, as I mentioned before, not just the corporates, but banks. So just think about that in less than a month, 3,000 PSPs across all countries in Europe have to go live in a big bank approach. I was mentioning COP before. COP was launched 5 years ago. It took more than 3 years to launch initiative across 300 PSPs. So we are talking about 10 times the size of what happened in the UK, and not just in one country, but in a multitude of countries. So it's going to be a big challenge. However, the benefit is clearly something that we appreciate, and that's why we are trying to help our clients to go into VOP and to help them to basically facilitate this. However, the challenge remains, as I mentioned before, on the global space. In the global space, there is not such a framework. There is not anything that allows banks to easily connect and exchange information about who is owning which account before a payment is being made. So what are the alternatives we have there? What are we doing to basically try to basically mitigate this gap? So there's multitude of solutions that are basically popping up, as I mentioned, at domestic level. So we, as a global bank, what we are trying to do basically is to combine those solutions that are existing at different levels to work with other PSPs, with global networks. So, for example, SWIFT launched a very interesting initiative a few years ago called verification, beneficiary account verification, BAB. I think at the moment there are probably around 100 plus banks that are members of this. Deutsche Bank is one of the banks that is member of that. And that solution allows to basically all member banks can communicate in real time and exchange information about who is owning which account. So if basically you are doing that validation through SWIFT, through Deutsche Bank or any other bank that's a member, we immediately can contact beneficiary bank and get that solution. However, that's not enough. This obviously does not cover probably even less than 10, 20% of the global space. The solution to do that is, as I mentioned before, collaboration. So basically trying to integrate these different domestic solutions into one solution that would allow us to provide our clients with one single channel in which you basically provide us your beneficiary IBAN, your beneficiary name, and then we try to find, the best routing mechanism to reach into that beneficiary bank through one of the global networks, through one of the partnerships we have with some other fintech companies, and then provide you the answer in a harmonized way, because every scheme may have even different rules about how to provide this feedback. This is definitely helpful. Is this covering everything globally? No. So basically what we see, and this is the way that we obviously are trying to operate in this space, is collaboration is fundamental. That's why we need to be obviously across PSPs, trying to collaborate in global network initiatives like SWIFT I mentioned before. There's other networks that have been also created by other global PSPs that we are also member of. Collaborating with fintechs, there's many fintechs in the space that are working on creating solutions that can also offer to banks. So that kind of compelling solutions that basically look into different alternatives in the market, some regulatory initiatives, some other non-regulatory initiatives, put them together and trying to offer this to a corporate client is what I would suggest is the best way to go. And coming back to the point from Juan, definitely the best way to avoid all this recall of funds, all these costs, is to basically being able to detect that potential fraud.
So we are very much dependent on the banks, but what I'm hearing is, whilst there's some great ideas, we still need the banks to have a more coordinated global approach. There
Absolutely.
are great ideas, however.
Absolutely.
Just on the technology, Jason, there was a great question from Asha here. From Michael on the cloud connection. As we continue to get sophisticated in our technologies, and we go cloud-based, and we've got ERP systems, we've got treasury management systems, we are very much also dependent on third-party technologies. How do you think what needs to be done in that space, and what's maybe a deficiency in that space that you can see from a perspective?
Sure. Just one follow-up from what Kimo was saying, and with clawing the money back, there are, in some cases, if you can identify that a fraudulent payment was made, and you can identify that within a 48-hour period, in the United States and in some other countries that are part of what they call a mutual legal assistance treaty that's out there, and that's most of Europe and the UK, along with the United States. If you notify law enforcement within that 48-hour period, there's a strong chance they may be able to stop that payment and claw that money back. It's not all the time, but there is that possibility. And I think law enforcement and the banks are working closely together to help, avoid these payments from going out, because most of the time they're going to organized crime groups or terrorist groups that are out there. And so I just wanted to say that. With respect to third-party vendors, that is where I think a huge amount of risk takes place these days for companies. And I think many companies have a good third-party vendor management program. And what they do, like in the case of Kroll and other companies, they send out questionnaires and they try to validate what level of cybersecurity maturity those third-party vendors have. They require them, in some cases, contractually to push down certain types of information security requirements in order to do business with that company. And I'm sure that Kemi and Lena's companies are doing that kind of vendor management program, right? I think that's a more holistic component where you're requiring sort of them to respond on a questionnaire. And then in many cases, you have to validate that through some type of audit in order to do business with a certain company.
Okay, great. Now, thank you for that. There's a couple of questions, one from Andrew, one from Asha, that I do want to cover. And I think that's a great way to come, as we come to the end of this session. What is the best approach for an organization to start thinking about, if they haven't already, to get to a point where they're comfortable around managing cybersecurity? If you were to roadmap it, Kemi, what would you suggest and recommend?
I think for me, I would probably put this in about 4 phases. I will start with a sort of a foundation phase, whereby maybe 0 to 3 months sort of, where you clarify your objectives, you select a framework, you do a baseline assessment, of where you are in terms of your current state, and then you define metrics. And now this is going to be collaborative. We are talking about multiple streams. You're talking about your core business priorities together with Treasury, that we often see as the first line of defense when it comes to financial flows. And then the second phase, from my perspective, would be the sort of the first reports, which is more the second phase after your sort of data exploration around your roadmap. And this is where you will collaboratively and jointly build a scorecard, identify your top risks, and maybe pilot reporting as it is. I mean, Rome was not built in a day, so you would expect to at least have a baseline to start from. And then the phase 3 is what I would call your embed and mature. In terms of your roadmap, how do you formalize the reporting cycle? Yes, so we've developed a report, we're very good with it. At the end of the day, we want to ensure that our board are aware of our cybersecurity reporting. So is it quarterly? Is that going to be your cadence? Then you benchmark externally. What are my peers doing? You expand on the metrics. It may very well be that you contrast on your metrics, and then link this to your ultimate sort of strategy and investment. Where are the gaps? Do we need to invest? Then the fourth phase is that sort of what next? How do you optimize and integrate your roadmap? Do you integrate it into your enterprise risk management? What is your forward looks like? How do you automate data collection? What is the continuous improvement that you can actually include into your roadmap? So in a nutshell, that's how I'll do it. And I'll say keep it visual, to be honest. A one-pager always does it for me. Start small, but always make sure that you maintain a clear link between your cybersecurity posture, your business risk, and your investment decisions.
Thank you, Kemi. Very quickly, Lena, from you, same question. I'm very conscious we're running out of time.
Yeah, many of the same things, but I would just say cybersecurity is not just an IT issue. It's really an element of business resilience and operations you do. So cooperation is very important to have a unified operating model across. So, and also creating a cyber-aware culture in your company is very important for the awareness building.
Let me just take the moment to say thank you to every one of the panelists. Mariel, I'm going to hand it back to you as we've hit the time.
Thank you very much, Onkar. I'm very sorry I was muted. Before we go, I would like to say a few thanks and give you some information on the upcoming activities. So please let me first thank you, Onkar, for chairing this session, and the speakers for sharing their experience and their best practice. It's been phenomenal. I would like to thank Deutsche Bank for making this event possible. And finally, thank you all for being here. I hope you found the session helpful. Please feel free to continue this conversation with the speakers and colleagues at the Global Treasury Leaders community that I mentioned at the beginning of this webinar. You can join using the link I shared with you earlier on the chat. And through this platform, you can exchange experiences, ask questions to all the members, and we share contents on regular basis. Our next webinar will be in November on working capital management, and we will be sharing information shortly. So please watch out for our emails. I hope to see you then. And thank you again. Goodbye.